Hello everybody, welcome to Lord of Reads. In today's video, we're going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I do not know who created this tag, so when I post this, I will find out and I will link them in the description so that you can watch the original. So, in summary, this is a tag where you talk and answer questions about books that you've read in the first half of the year, and some staples, things that you liked, things that you didn't like, and overall chat over all your reading in the first half of the year. And there are 13 questions. I'm going to try not to repeat any books. I'm going to do my best not to do that. I think there's one repeat, but besides that, I've tried to diversify what my answers are into different series, different authors, things like that. That way we can get a broad scope of what's been happening with my reading in the first half of 2021. And with that, we can go ahead and get into the first question. The first question is best book that I've read so far, and that would definitely have to go to Crooked Kingdoms by Leigh Bardugo. Crooked Kingdoms is the second book in the second duology in the Grishaverse, and it follows 6 people, and they're in a gang, and they pull off heists for money. And it's definitely one of those like morally gray characters, just with 6 morally gray characters, which is so much fun. And in the first book, they get a tip that there's this mission that they can go on, and it would give them a huge amount of money that would pay off any debt that they could ever get. And it's a suicide mission practically, so some of them are wary to go on it, some of them are not. And it's their journey in that. And the second book is spectacular. It was my first 5-star of the year, and it was spectacular. The way that the characters built off of each other's skills, it was fantastic. I've seen a lot of people say that the main character, whose name is Kaz, he is conniving, and he has all these schemes that he can come up with, and I've seen a lot of reviews say that they didn't like the book because they found that his scheming was too easy. His ability to come up with something that works, it was too easy. And I understand that. However, I think that that's the charm of the book, is his ability to do this. And I understand how people will say that it's easy because his schemes work, but reading it, not all of his schemes work. Most of them don't. During the books, he makes many iterations of schemes, and only the last one, that last variant, that's the only one that actually works. So, I understand what people say, but I just think that's the charm of the book. And his ability to come up with these schemes, that is the thing that made the book so enjoyable for me, and why I'm saying that it's the best book that I read so far this year. The next question, number 2, is what was the best sequel that I've read so far this year? And this would definitely have to go to A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So, this was a very enjoyable book. It was a 4-star. It is the second book in A Court of Thorns and Roses, that series. And the first book follows a girl named Feyre, and she accidentally kills a high fae, and because of that, she is taken back to the land of the fairies, and that's her punishment, is she has to stay there. And the fairies are not liked by the humans, and she doesn't like them. And that's what she has to do for her punishment. She has to be there and live there forever. And the second book was amazing. It was not my favorite book that I've read so far this year. However, the reasons that I liked it were because of how it built off the first book, which is why I'm saying that it's the best sequel, was just because of the way that it progressed. The first book it ended how I would imagine it to end. And the second book takes it in a completely different direction. I think that you can read the first book as a standalone. You won't get, all the backstory and stuff that you would from reading the rest of the series. But just by reading the first one, I think you get a good plot that can stand alone and doesn't need any more. It doesn't need anything to happen after it. And the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, takes it in a completely different direction that I personally really enjoyed. And it made me like characters that I never thought that I'd like from the first book. And it made me enjoy a plot that I didn't think that I would enjoy based on how the first book ended. There are things that happen at the end of the first book that kind of hint to where the story could be going, and reading that, I didn't think that I would enjoy the places that was going, but that sequel really made me enjoy all those plot twists that I didn't think that I would enjoy, even though I really did. So that is the reason that I'm saying that this is the best sequel of 2021. Question 3 is a new release of 2021 that you have not read yet. And for this, I'm going to have to go with Chain of Iron. I picked it up immediately as soon as my library got it, and never read it, and there is a good reason for that. I picked up Chain of Gold, the first book, immediately once I found it, and I didn't even know that there were things that were supposed to go before it. So I read Chain of Gold without having read Mortal Instruments, Infernal Devices, any of the other series that were published before that in the, Shadowhunter world. So, that is the reason that I have not read Chain of Iron yet, is I went back to the beginning, and I started with City of Bones, and I'm working my way through until I reread Chain of Gold, and then read Chain of Iron. But I wanted to have that backstory, because there were lots of characters that were fleshed out in those other series that were not looked at a whole lot in Chain of Gold, and I wanted to kind of delve into them before I continue with the new characters. And at this point, I don't remember what happened in Chain of Gold, so I would have to reread it anyway, and I figured that I might as well do that after having read the rest of the books that were published before that, so I can get a better scope of the world before going into this, because it is such a beloved series that I want to go into it with the full knowledge of everything that happened before it, so that it'll hopefully build off of that and be even better than if I would have read it without. So that is one that I definitely cannot wait to get to once I finish everything else that happened in the rest of the books in that world. So, can't wait to get to that at some point. Question 4 is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So, I have 2 books for this. The first one being A Psalm of Storms and Silence, which is the second book to A Song of Raids and Ruin. I think I said that. I think I got those titles right. This comes out, I believe, November 2nd is the release date for A Psalm of Storms and Silence. The first book follows 2 perspectives. A boy who is entering the city with his older and his younger sister, but to get into the city, a little bit of magic had to be used, and the price of that magic was that his younger sister has to be held captive until he completes this task. The task is to kill the princess of the city, and ironically enough, the princess is the second perspective, and I love the way that the 2 characters intertwined. I talked about it in my June wrap-up when I read A Song of Raids and Ruin, how it was very ironic and interesting for the reader because we, of course, know who the characters are, but the characters don't know, when they first meet, they don't know who the other characters are, even though they realize things that they have to do to the other one. They know that they have to do harm to the other characters, even if they don't always realize that they already know the other characters. So that's really humorous in, you know, the way that that's woven together and the irony throughout the book, and like the enemies to lovers type story, but with a very interesting twist and the magic and all that. It's definitely a very interesting book, and I cannot wait to get to it. The second release that I'm very excited for is The Kingdom of the Cursed, I believe, is what it's called. Kingdom of the Cursed by Kerri Maniscalco, which is the second book, the first being Kingdom of the Wicked. Now, this might seem strange based on one of the questions that happen later, but I'll explain that when I get to it. Kingdom of the Wicked follows a witch, and she summons a demon, and this happens right after her sister has been murdered, and she's trying to find out who murdered her sister, and the demon that she summons also wants to find the murderer for his own reasons. So they have to work together, even though they despise each other at the beginning. And they have to work together to get to their common goal of finding this murderer. And like the fantasy elements in the story, it's set in our world, but there's so much fantasy elements into it, and like the enemies to lovers again, of them despising each other and then having to work together, and that possibly turning into a romance. And then the end of the book, the plot twists, like everything that you learn throughout the book as the story unfolds, it's spectacular. So yes, very excited for this sequel to see where the story continues. Question 5 is biggest disappointment, and that would have to be Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. This is what I was talking about, how the last one. I'm really excited for the sequel, even though the first book was my biggest disappointment. This does not mean that I did not like the book. I rated it a 3-star. It was my only 3-star so far of 2021. Everything else has been 4 or 5. So it's not that I didn't like it, it was just that I had too high of expectations, so I expected it to be a 5 or at least a 4-star, and it wasn't. I still enjoyed it, it was just that everything else was, of course, a higher rating that I gave it, so even though I liked it, it had to be my biggest disappointment. And it was a good book, it was solid, 3-star. It was just that for the majority of it, I was confused. It's quite possibly because I don't read a lot of things that have witches, so the magical system was not something that was easily understood for me, and then they had bits that were written in other languages, which was also confusing. And then at some points in the plot, I was just confused as to what was happening. But I still enjoyed it. The intrigue was great, and what I understood of the plot, it was carried along nicely, and the pacing was great. It was just that I was confused throughout some of the book, and the beginning dragged on a little bit, just me trying to wrap my head around what was happening. But besides that, it was a good book, it was a solid book, and I'm very excited for the sequel, just because hopefully now that I understand and I've gone through the magic building and the world building, it should be easier for me to continue with the sequel and focus more on the plot than just trying to understand things about the world and the magic. So, biggest disappointment, it was still a good book, just not what I had hyped it up to be. Question 6 is the biggest surprise, and this is definitely The Toll by Neal Shusterman. I read this, I believe, January. It was the very beginning of the year, and I had read Scythe and Thunderhead last year, and I picked up The Toll wanting to finish the series because I loved the first two, but I had seen so many reviews saying that they did not like the ending, and that they DNF'd the book, and that because of what happened, they no longer liked the first two. So I was very apprehensive at picking it up because I did not want to ruin my opinion and my like for the first two books. So I picked it up very apprehensively, and then I read it, and I really enjoyed it. I flew through it, and it was spectacular. The first book, Scythe, follows two children, and it's set in the future where AI has taken over and there is no natural death. So the population is rising and it has to be kept down so that we can sustain Earth. And because of that, people instituted scythes, and they're just people that have been given the right to go and kill off other people and call it gleaning, so that they can keep the population down. And it was a really, philosophical and psychological look at what happens when humans are immortal and there's no longer any time limit, there's nothing, to stop them, so they kind of just get lazy. And it was a very interesting read, and a very thought-provoking read, and I loved everything that happened in the third book. It was definitely not what I expected to happen. It was taken in a completely different way, but I really enjoyed it, and that was just a very big surprise because I'd heard so many people say that they didn't enjoy it, and I was very apprehensive, but I really enjoyed it, so big surprise, and I'm very happy about that because I really wanted to love the series, so I'm very happy that I did. Question 7 is new favorite author, and for this I had to go with Leonie Taylor, author of Strange the Dreamer and the second book, Muse of Nightmares, which is on my July TBR, and I can't wait to get to it. Strange the Dreamer was amazing. I know lots of people won't say an author's their favorite after reading one book, but I loved Strange the Dreamer so much, and I think the reason that I liked it so much was, for one, the writing. I loved Leonie Taylor's writing. And the other thing that made it so easy to enjoy and so surprising for me was that I like plot-driven stories. I like things with big and complex and complicated plots. And Strange the Dreamer is a very character-led, character-driven story, and at the beginning I did not think I would like it. I almost put it down, just because there was so much on the characters and the plot just seemed like nothing was happening for the first 100 pages, and I could not get into it. And then all of a sudden, even though the plot was moving slowly, once we started introducing new characters and seeing their thoughts and opinions and how those characters come together, I really enjoyed the character-driven aspects of the story, which is, different for me because I don't read a lot, I don't enjoy a lot of character-driven stories. So that was definitely a big surprise, and it established Leonie Taylor, even after one book, as being one of my favorite authors. So I can't wait to pick up more from her. Can't wait to finish Muse of Nightmares, and I would love to continue on to A Daughter of Smoke and Bone and that trilogy, because I want to see how she writes her other books. Even though I know I love her writing style, I want to see what her other books, how they're carried out, if they're plot-driven or character-driven, and if I enjoy that as much as I did Strange the Dreamer. Question 8 is new fictional crush, and I don't have an answer for this. I don't crush on fictional characters, so I can't answer this. But we can go on to the next question, which is close kind of. And that would be new favorite character for question 9. And this I do have an answer to. This would have to be Rysand from A Court of Thorns and Roses. More the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury. That was the main reason why I said that A Court of Mist and Fury was my favorite sequel, was because I despised Rysand from the first book, and then the second book made me really enjoy him as a character, and I never thought that I would like him, and then reading the third book, it just made me like him even more. So the way that his character grows, and it's not so much that his character grows as much as the layers and his masks and all that kind of get pulled away, so you see who he actually is, because I don't think this is really a spoiler, but there are a lot of perceptions that people view him as, and seeing all those kind of stripped away and seeing what he's really like under, like, everything that people see him as and what he's really like, it makes him a very interesting and well fleshed out character throughout the second and the third book. So definitely a really good character that I never thought I'd like, but glad that I did. Question 10 is a book that made you cry, and when I first started looking at this and seeing what my answers were going to be, I did not have an answer for this. The closest thing I was going to say would be Fairest by Marissa Meyer, and I can go ahead and talk about that as kind of an honorable mention. It didn't make me cry, but it made me, feel very sorry for the characters that it follows. So it is a short novella in the Cinder, the Lunar Chronicles series. First book being Cinder, and it follows her, Cinder, as a mechanic and a cyborg in a post-apocalyptic version of our world. And a very deadly disease is going around, and while this is happening, she meets the Prince of New Beijing, and she gets dragged into this whole, political plot. And throughout the series, you meet the Queen of the Moon, and so Earth colonized the Moon, and we follow their queen, and she is a terrible person, reading her throughout the Lunar Chronicles. And then once you read Fairest, you understand her backstory and why she's like that. You see how terrible her sister was and the way she grew up, and how, her wants and the things that she could never have because of her family and the way she grew up and the people surrounding her, how she could never have those things, and how that caused her to grow bitter and conniving and like the person you see throughout the Lunar Chronicles. And I think that just made me feel very sorry for her and all the rest of the characters that had to endure what she became. So that would be the closest that I was gonna say. And then, after I'd written this down, I finished A Court of Wings and Ruin, and I cried on this twice. At one point, I don't remember the second time. I think it was just 10 pages later after the first time, and I couldn't tell you the specific point, but the first time it was 80 pages from the end, and there's a certain speech given. If you've read the book, there's a certain speech that's given before they go and they do something that could possibly kill them. And there's a certain speech given that was the most touching paragraph I've ever read. It was so sweet and heartfelt, and I loved it. One of the reasons that this book was so powerful was because of the heartfelt and the sweet moments that you get throughout, and this one was no exception. And another reason I like the book that's not related to the question at all was, I don't believe it's a spoiler, but there's a war, which you kind of gather from the first and the second book. But there is a war. And I love, like, when authors and stories, they'll, like, have their characters send out certain people, and they'll gather more armies. Like, The Lord of the Rings, that was one of the main reasons that I loved it, was you had, like, they would send out people to get different armies to come help them, and then they would all sweep in. And that happened in this book, and it was just, like, the best reading experience of a war that I've ever read in a fictional story. But that's not what the question was, but I just like to ramble about this book because it was really good. But, yeah, that one speech, touching, heartfelt, adorable. I loved it, so this is, like, the only book that I could put on for this, besides Fairest being an honorable mention. But I would really recommend this, because it's really good, so you should try it, and read the series, because it's really good. Question 11 is a book that made you happy, and this would definitely have to go to Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This follows a girl, and her brother has gone missing, and she and her mom have been trying to find him, and she gets a tip from her brother as to where he might be, and he says in a message that he wrote for her, that was to be sent to her if anything happened, he says that there is a magical society that he was secretly in, and that's the reason that he's gone missing. So she has to go there in an attempt to find him, and the book was so sweet. Throughout, terrible things happen to the character, but the way that, you know, she overcomes is spectacular. And while I was reading it, I was really getting the vibes of, for one, House in the Cerulean Sea, which I read in 2021. It was amazing. But it was definitely giving me those vibes with, like, the magical children, and super sweet. But the reason that this made me so happy was, like, the secret society setting reminded me so much of a series of unfortunate events, and, like, the secret society and the wacky names and the wacky people that lead this society. And it just made me feel so nostalgic, and then mixed with magical children, it was just amazing, and it made me so happy to read. And I can't wait for there to be any sequels. I need lots of sequels to this book, because it was so amazing, and it made me so happy to read. And if you want to feel very happy while reading a book, I suggest you read that one, because it's amazing. Question 12 is the most beautiful book that you've bought in the first half of the year, and this definitely has to go to Build a Fire and Other Stories by Jack London. This is a beautiful, beautiful, like, foiled and grayish blue copy of this classic, and I picked this up at an antique store, I believe, and it's just absolutely stunning, and it has, like, cream colored inside that really works with the blue. But it also, like, the thing that really makes me love it is the illustrations, if I can find one. But they're beautiful illustrations throughout. Here's one. But, like, super cool, like, full-paged illustrations. There's one in here that's, like, my favorite illustration. Yeah, this one, of the ship. And it's just so cool. I just love this book, and how it looks, and the colors, and the foil. I love foil on any book. If a book has foil, I will want it, and I will read it. And I will hope that I like it, so that I'll want to keep it. But, yeah, definitely the most beautiful book that I bought this year. Just stunning. Okay, question 13. The final question is books that you need to read by the end of 2021. I did a whole video on 5-star predictions, books that I wanted to get to in 2021. And I've read quite a few of those books, I think, so far. But there are new books that were added to that list since then that I really want to get to. Those being King of Scars and Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. I need to finish the Grishaverse. I love it so far. Reading Shadow and Bone, that was an amazing experience. Like, one of my first glimpses into high fantasy, like young adult high fantasy. And then Six of Crows I read recently. Six of Crows I read in June, and Crooked Kingdoms I read in July, and they were just spectacular. Yes, they were just so good. And I really want to finish this because these books follow my favorite character from the first trilogy, the first trilogy, and he made a little bit of an appearance in the second duology, and that would be, Nikolai, King Nikolai. I love him as a character. He is just amazing, like, his humor, and, like, his calm look at life that can annoy everyone else is just so funny. But yeah, I definitely want to finish that and see how I like the rest of the Grishaverse. Those, especially because they follow one of my favorite characters. So, yes, I can't wait to get to that. So, hopefully, by the end of 2021, I will have read it. I'm really hoping. Okay, so that was my mid-year book freakout tag. I really hope that you enjoyed. Those were only a few of the, I want to say 46 books that I've read so far this year. I believe that I'm at 46 at the time of filming this, like halfway through July. So, those are only a few of them, but I really enjoyed most of the things that I've read, and I really hope that you have too, that you've had a good first half of 2021, that your reading has been going well, everything like that. And I hope that you have an even better second half of 2021 with a whole bunch more fun books. But with that, I'm going to get off of here, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and let me know down below how your reading year so far has been going and what you plan on reading in the second half of 2021. And with that, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!